Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, St. Bernard Parish has been hit by storms before, sometimes in the form of its parish president. There was more this week. If you wanted to meet with Governor Bobby Jindal last week, you might have had to go to New Hampshire. Mayor Mitch Landrieu was moving around too, but easier to get to at a series of neighborhood meetings. We'll look tonight at politicians reaching out and what they are hearing. We'll also examine the latest in the gubernatorial elections, the state losing political clout in Washington, and ongoing bad luck at the police department. On the beat for us are tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jeremy Alford, publisher, LawPolitics.com. Jonathan Bullington, reporter, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. And Stephanie Grace, columnist, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to go first over to Stephanie. You had a piece this morning about the saga of St. Bernard Parish President Dave Peralta, and he was pretty active this week.
He was. St. Bernard's really gotten hammered by Hurricane Katrina, obviously, the BP spill, and now maybe you call him Hurricane Dave, I don't know. But this is a guy who is under indictment in two different places, in St. Tammany Parish in Baton Rouge. Mm-hmm. He was under indictment for allegedly sexually assaulting his wife. That was dropped, but the grand jury is still meeting, so that could come up again. So 3 different cases. One is a campaign finance case, one is a stalking case. Yet he is going about his business, and he is really at war with the council. And many parish council members have called on him to resign. He resisted that. At this point, we're pretty close to the end of the term, although he's running for re-election. I think they just hope that he will be gone soon.
But he returned the favor. He asked for them to resign this week.
He called on the parish council to resign. Mm-hmm. The majority of the council, they declined, obviously. What happened is there were a series of vetoes. There's a tech company that is considered very close to him that the parish council wanted to fire. This company has actually gotten a target letter. So, there are some political shenanigans going on there too. And he has, there's been kind of an ongoing fight over this company, and the parish council voted to fire them, in a couple different ways, ban them from the premises. There are 2 different ordinances. He vetoed them, they overrode, there was back and forth, and he, at some point during the week, claimed that they were violating their role and called on them to resign and actually declared a state of emergency. Because of what they were doing, which they came in and voted.
Because they vetoed 2 ordinances?
Yes.
Was a state of emergency?
And overrode it, yes. And because they were encroaching on his territory, basically.
As president to enter into contracts or to void
and keep these contracts and causing all sorts of mayhem by ending this contract, he claimed. So then he said he was going to sue them, and then of course he has to go to the parish council for money to sue the parish council. So
because parish attorney would have a conflict, so he needed to hire outside counsel. Is that the issue?
Yes. So he called for an emergency meeting this morning, and amazingly enough, they did not show up. There was no quorum.
So there was no resolution on that. So right now he can't hire outside counsel.
Right.
And there is a hearing next week because that tech firm is suing the parish, are they not?
I'm not sure if they've actually filed suit yet, but
there is a hearing
and
next
there are
week.
Also some employees that have been fired, and there's talk of lawsuits. Some employees that are supposedly cooperating with the government against President Peralta. So there are possible lawsuits. They may end up suing the parish too. So it's just in this crazy spiral at this point.
Yeah, there's just more added to it, it seems like, every week.
And of course, it all started with these, personal behavior, sexual, within his marriage. It was an allegation of rape, but it was downgraded to sexual battery. And then again, at that point, there is no formal charge, but it could come back. But that grand jury that's looking into the sexual assault is also apparently looking into malfeasance. So there's a lot going on here.
And so the tech company where it plays in is the stalking charge in St. Tammany Parish. Is that correct?
The employee, one of the employees who was fired supposedly created false email addresses for the president so he could send messages to his now ex-wife.
So the people of St. Bernard Parish, the people of St. Bernard Parish have really worked hard in this past decade to bring their community back, because their community was wiped out.
And I have to say, they've fought hard over the years to overcome some ridicule of St. Bernard, frankly. I mean, they've had some wacky leaders. We were talking before about Lynn Dean, the former Parish president, who once ate duckweed to prove that it wasn't poisonous. And then you had Junior Rodriguez, who, walked with a cane. And when President Bush came after Hurricane Katrina, he would goose him and think it was funny.
There's no explanation for that.
There's no explanation, and apparently, from what I hear, the Secret Service was very alarmed at that. And he was not really supposed to go close to the president after that.
So
When we talk about the people of St. Bernard Parish, a lot of the people of St. Bernard Parish live in St. Tammany Parish now.
Yeah.
I mean, they lost a lot of people.
They did.
They're about
after
two-thirds
the
back.
hurricane.
They're about two-thirds back, and they've been, steadily gaining population,
Right.
and some different folks moving into the parish too.
But it's still somewhat precarious. I mean, they voted down money for flood protection a couple times. I mean, it's still a very environmentally vulnerable place, and how to defend it hasn't really been worked out yet. It's very expensive, so they don't need this.
So at this point, of course, we should say that President Peralta basically, he says that all of the charges against him are false. There's just no foundation for any of this. He's innocent of everything,
Right.
and that he'll have to go to whatever hearing there is next week. He's going to have to go without counsel because he can't get one. He was not.
It's hard to keep track
because
because there's all the civil actions and all the criminal actions and a campaign and a re-election campaign.
And for all the people who don't want him to run for re-election, he really has to be saying he will. Otherwise, he's a lame duck, and he's totally ineffective.
And there's
and so it doesn't matter if he's saying it. What happens is they're qualifying. It could be at 5 o'clock the last day of qualifying.
Right. And often what happens when there's a criminal case against a public figure, one of the points of leverage is whether they run for re-election or whether they resign. So it could be part of that too.
Well, he's running for re-election right as far as it goes right now. Okay, Steph, thanks a lot.
He has never wavered.
No, he hasn't. Jeremy, political clout for the Louisiana delegation, it seems to be weakening a bit up in Capitol Hill.
Well, if you believe The Hill, which is a D.C. newspaper, it certainly is. They do an annual ranking called the Clout Index, and they have moved Louisiana down the list from number 4 last cycle to number 30 right now. They attribute that to the defeat of Senator Mitch Landrieu, who was a chairman. And in the story, they say it could have been worse if Steve Scalise would not have been elected whip, which is the number 3 position in the House. Looking forward, I think it could potentially get worse for us. You have to start with David Vitter. We have a U.S. senator, a senior U.S. senator running for governor. Win or lose, let's just say he wins the governorship. Already, Congressman Charles Boustany from Lafayette and Congressman John Fleming from North Louisiana have said they're going to run for that Senate seat if Vitter doesn't run for re-election. So that then opens up 2 House seats that are held by veteran House members. Now, there's no guarantee that Boustany or Fleming is going to win the Senate seat because Treasurer John Kennedy is probably going to run too. So I'm not saying this is going to happen, but the pieces are in play for potentially for us to lose a senior U.S. senator who's also a chairman, 2 veteran congressmen. And then let's talk about Steve Scalise just for a second. I think we can all agree that he survived the controversy from earlier this year of speaking to a group that included some white supremacist members. He survived that in Louisiana. But back on the Hill, it's still an issue. It was brought up by the White House press secretary just a few weeks ago in a conversation about the Confederate flag debate. And you got to remember that Republicans right now, in order for them to capture the White House, they have got to reach out to minority voters. And so they're making a big push to do this while their whip has this controversy. So not only does Scalise have to get reelected by voters, he has to get reelected by the House too.
So are you saying that this could perhaps, he's in jeopardy for not being reelected, would you say? Is his position
for whip position?
Yeah.
If I had to guess right now, I would say that Steve Scalise will find a way to get reelected. He's well liked inside the rails at the Capitol. But I'm just saying that's one more possibility to consider, one more little piece of political speculation that we all like to talk about around the campfire as we move toward thinking about where's our clout moving.
He actually went to one of the funerals in Charleston, and I think that he is very conscious of trying to rehabilitate his image on this front.
So why is this clout so important, that we have a strong delegation well placed?
Well, I think there are obvious reasons, right? If you're a chairman, you can only attain chairmanships through seniority usually, and as a chairman you can direct money, projects, brick and mortar to your state, but you can also convinced high-ranking officials to visit your state for disasters or any other number of reasons. So it's important to have that seniority, to have that chairmanship. And one more thing to add, Congressman Ralph Abraham, the freshman from Northeast Louisiana, has promised to only serve 3 terms. So he is out in 4.5 years.
There was a time when Louisiana was really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the days of the Solid South, all the southern states were powerful because they kept on re-electing the same people, and they all got seniority. But first of all, there was a time when Louisiana had 8 House seats, and now it's down to 6. And just about every one of those 8 was a chairman of something. And so you gave him a lot of power right there. You had people like Russell Long, who was chairman of the Finance Committee. You had Hale Boggs, who was the House Majority Leader. You had F. Edward Hebert, who was head of the Military Committee. What they say about Hebert was that he was the one guy that generals would salute to when he walked down the hall. I mean, everyone in Louisiana.
And we had major.
That's how we got to Saints. Okay.
And major members of appropriations too. We
Yeah.
had Bob Livingston and then Mary Landrieu.
Yeah.
That's a big loss because of that committee.
John Breaux, Billy Tozan, energy chairs.
We got the Saints because of help the NFL needed with antitrust laws in Washington, and so Hale Boggs helped them with that. So we used to be a very, very powerful delegation, and we've really, really lost that. But even the people we have, who may all one day prove to be great people, but they're all junior. Right now, I mean, there's not that really, except for Scalise, there's not that really major leader right now.
Boustany has become a major voice on Ways and Means. Fleming has become a very important player in the conservative sect of the House. So those would be 2 considerable losses. And speaking about redistricting, there's already some scuttlebutt about Louisiana losing yet another congressional district next cycle, and seeing those 2 North Louisiana districts consolidated into one.
All right, Jeremy, we'll keep following this and have you on board to talk about it, I'm sure. Thanks a lot. Okay, Jonathan, over to you. New Orleans Police Department has literally been under fire. They've had some really sad losses and incidents happen over this past month.
Well, the most recent was Monday, and you're right. It seems to be kind of one after the other for them. The most recent was Monday. A gentleman by the name of Donald Harris Jr. He's the son of a longtime New Orleans Police Department member. He's currently a homicide investigator in the DA's office. He was killed in a motorcycle crash. Before him, you had...
And he wasn't on a motorcycle. A motorcycle crashed into him, right?
No, I think he was the motorcycle.
Oh, he was? Okay,
Yeah.
okay, I'm sorry.
So that's not the hit and run that you
No.
That was
That's
a different incident, and then there was a hit
that's
and run as
Vernell
well.
Brown Jr. is the officer, and that wasn't a hit and run because the motorist stayed at the scene. What happened was it was kind of a chain reaction sort of crash. 2 vehicles collide, and then they careen into Officer Brown, who was responding to a report of a vehicle fire. He was rushed to the hospital, and the last I heard, he is in, they use the word grave condition.
It doesn't, in a coma.
Yeah, he's in a coma. It doesn't sound good. I talked to his father this week, and certainly the family is very spiritual and holding out some hope here that he'll make a recovery. But it's going to be a tough road, certainly.
Here, our best in prayers to that family. And then, of course, there was Officer Holloway.
Yeah, you had before or after Officer Holloway, you had Milan Areola, who is the daughter of a New Orleans police officer and a member of the fire department. She was gunned down out in Gentilly, I believe. You had Officer Holloway. You have the same day as Officer Holloway, the parents of a New Orleans Police Department member were found dead in what authorities believe was a murder-suicide. And then you still have in May, let's not forget, Hano Police Officer James Bennett.
Right.
And there hasn't been any sort of movement thus far in that investigation. So it's kind of one after the other, and you certainly, what you come to realize is that the police department is, they're attending a lot of wakes and a lot of funerals.
And so how are the members of the police department responding to this? They have a hard enough job as it is. Their ranks are low. They are literally under fire. We see this shootout on Basin Street in the middle of the afternoon, Thursday afternoon, and now all of this happening to their personal friends.
I mean, you can't, it's hard to say. I don't know how they're doing when they're alone, or in among their ranks. I think it has to affect them. I think they're human beings. We like to think that police officers are somehow different than us, and they're able to process this a bit better than maybe we are. But I think when you have one after the other, and you're just attending wake after wake after wake, it can't not affect you in a certain way. And then they're still called upon to go out and do their job every day, and I'm still hearing, officers going to respond to crashes on expressways, and that's got to be in the back of their mind as they pull over on that shoulder to investigate a crash or car fire or whatever.
Right, which is what happened to Officer Brown, who remains in the hospital.
Yes, it was a supposed vehicle fire.
Yeah.
I remember something about that shootout yesterday. The guy on the Rampart, and he's just on Basin Street. Okay,
yeah.
And he's firing a gun, and
I should interrupt you real quick to say, like, using the word guy a bit loosely. When you look at that video, I mean, he looks
very young.
12, 13. I don't know. It's a young looking shooter there.
So this young-looking shooter.
Yeah.
Okay, but the fact is that I think a real factor now to crime and people's perception of crime is that there's video cameras all over the place now, and this became a story because the video camera picked it up. And had there not been a video camera, it probably wouldn't have even been a story. I mean, it like led the TV news last night because there was something visual to show. And it could be people have been doing that kind of thing all along, but now we're just seeing more of it because there are more eyes out there that's showing this sort of thing.
We're seeing it. We're not just hearing reports of it, but still, shootouts like that with how many cones did you see?
34 evidence
when
markers.
you were at the scene, in the middle of the day, that's pretty horrifying. So we have to move on right now, otherwise we're going to be running out of time for the other ones. So thanks a lot, Jonathan.
No
Stephanie, over to you. Our governor in New Hampshire.
Yes.
How's he playing in New Hampshire?
Pretty well, especially compared to back in Louisiana. I was on vacation up Massachusetts. I took a little side trip, and he was having a town hall meeting. He's been doing that. He has really hardly been back in Louisiana since the legislative session ended and he announced for president. He's been going back and forth between Iowa and New Hampshire and having these town hall meetings. And if you think back to 2003 when he really launched his political career, this is a really good format for him. He doesn't always do well on television and in interviews, but he does very well person to person and answering questions and among friendly crowds. He got about 100 people in this small town called Rochester, which I had never heard of, right on the Maine border. And people were curious about him. They were inclined to like him. They hadn't settled on him. Most of the people I talked to, these were not really people considering Jeb Bush, for example. They were more Marco Rubio, Scott Walker type of voters. But, there are they feel like they have a lot of choices, and, it's kind of a sport up there in these small states.
You personally observed it, and they seem to like what they saw?
They seem to like what they saw. His wife, Supriya, is traveling with him. They make a very charismatic couple. And, there were very few questions about what's going on back in Louisiana. So, of course, that was probably very nice for him. He got to talk about radical Islam and hyphenated Americans and Obamacare and all of that. It's actually interesting. One woman did ask about some of the things happening back here. I think she's a part-time resident, and asked, for example, about the fact that he had vetoed the legislature basically removed funding for the state troopers who were traveling with him as he campaigns in this budget cycle, in this horrible budget cycle, and he vetoed that. There were a couple state troopers up there in New Hampshire. We paid for them to be there, and he said he didn't know much about it. He deferred to state police, and the crowd started applauding him. Not, they were on his side, and that. It's probably pretty nice for him.
Did you get the listening to the governor? Did it sound like a different governor than what you've used to hear here in Baton Rouge and at the Capitol?
Very much. Well, one interesting thing is New Hampshire is social religious conservatism is really not that big a thing up there, and in fact, it's probably considered a negative to a lot of voters. So he really didn't talk about the religious freedom stuff that he's been pounding everywhere, and in Iowa, where there it is a very important part of the electorate. But really, I thought this phrase was interesting. He used it a couple times. He talked about eliminating 26% of the budget. We've heard that before, and 30,000 state. Here he talks about state workers. There he talked about state bureaucrats. And it's like, okay, well, that's a loaded term. It's a very loaded term for Republicans. But when you think about that, that's some of those people are the people who worked in the privatized hospitals. So now you're saying a nurse is a bureaucrat. I mean, it's real political speak and not aimed at people who know a lot.
He will participate in a forum that's going to be held before the Fox debate.
Correct, yes.
It's sponsored by a few newspapers.
Newspapers in Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina, which are the 3 big early voting states, they're very unhappy about the fact that the networks are limiting the fields. It feels like, they feel like it really takes away their role in culling the field, and that candidates have to focus on the national campaign as opposed to the local campaigns. So that he will be doing that, and a few others. There is pushback to this plan to only allow 10 candidates, but at this point he's not in the debates.
So people will get a chance to hear from him.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to move back over to Jeremy and talking about governors. Let's talk about the race to replace Governor Jindal. How's that looking?
Right, and there is a race, I assure you. There is a race, despite the fact that the folks don't seem interested, because, hey, if it doesn't happen on TV, it doesn't happen, right? It doesn't exist. But there is a race, and the only person that's been on TV is Scott Angel, the public service commissioner from Acadiana, who I finally called the Boudin candidate. But we are starting to see some movement. They are out there meeting with people, and some are doing radio. I think all of them really are doing internet advertising. So we're starting to see some movement. And at lapolitics.com, we have plotted all of the public polls dating back to December, and you can clearly see this race shaping up. And what's happening is we're starting to see Scott Angel slightly overtake Jay Darden among the bottom tier. So Scott Angel is moving. A lot of that is attributable to massive media buys in Acadiana, Baton Rouge, North Louisiana. Darden, meanwhile, is about to have a super PAC file its first report in Louisiana. If they have a lot of money, they could put it on TV and maybe Darden starts moving again. But what's really interesting on the top is that we've all assumed that there's going to be a runoff with David Vitter, John Bel Edwards in that order in October. But right now, the polls have them moving ever closer together. And, I don't think it's outside of the realm of possibility that just maybe John Bel Edwards leads this race in the primary. Now, don't forget, Mary Landrieu led the primary last year, and he is the lone Democrat against 3 Republicans. Anything can happen. We're 99 days out. All of these candidates have a lot of money, especially David Vitter, especially the allied super PACs. They're going to spend it eventually. And I just want to recall one thing. Garrett Graves ran for Congress last year in the Baton Rouge region, barely showed up in the polls at the beginning of the year. 45 days out from the election, he dumped his entire campaign war chest. I mean, we're talking a couple $1 million, and he managed to beat Edwin Edwards. Maybe that's the strategy moving forward for some of these folks. 45 days, intense media strategy, lots of money on the air, should make for interesting TV.
This means nonstop. That's what we'll be experiencing.
Like the old days where you had a candidate from New Orleans, like usually a mayor or something, who's like the more liberal candidate. He leads the primary, then loses. They always lose, and I think that's a situation John Bel Edwards is in. I mean, is there a circumstance where you can see him having a chance of winning?
That runoff, I think you're right, though. We always have that, the 2 ends of the spectrum, the David Duke, Edwin Edwards, Mike Foster, Cleo Fields, John Bel Edwards, David Vitter. They haven't started to hit on David Vitter yet. There's some baggage we all know connected to David Vitter, and there's only one super PAC really swinging at him, and they're only doing it through billboards. So, David Vitter, we're talking about a guy with universal name recognition, tons of money, and he should be a juggernaut in this race. And I'm starting to think that maybe he has nowhere to go but down. I think his best case scenario is to maintain what he has, try to get into the runoff. But we'll have to see. It's just an interesting race.
The onslaught begins when? After Labor Day?
Usually that's the traditional date. Yeah, some insiders say it's right after the Grand Isle Tarpon Rodeo, which is at the end of this month, but it's soon. It's coming.
Qualifying is immediately after Labor Day, I think.
September
the Tuesday
9th, 10th, 8th, 9th, 10th.
Yeah.
But like you say, it's coming, that's for sure. Okay, Stephanie, over to you quickly in wrapping up our discussion today about Mayor Landrieu starting his community meetings.
Yes, also someone else who is very good at these community meetings, he is actually having them here at home with his constituents. He does this every summer. He calls them the Budgeting for Outcomes meetings, and in theory they are to kind of get public input into the budget that his staff is writing as we speak. They're not really that anymore. They really are more just general community meetings where he gets to hear questions and see what people are thinking. And in this case, he had 3 this week. He has 2 more coming up. I went to the District B meeting, which was on Wednesday. Some of the topics that came up, certainly public defenders are out in force. They're worried about they're in a real budget crunch, so they're seeking some help from the city. People talking about the jail and the size of the jail and whether there will be this new mental health wing and how to house juveniles who are tried as adults. So that was another kind of big topic. I'm going to tell you some monuments, some discussion about the removing the monuments. Of course, Lee Circle is in District B. Big topic was bicycles, I'm going to tell you.
Really? Bicycles?
Really, two different things. One is all the horrible roadwork on Napoleon Avenue we've been hearing about for so long. There's a new plan that the city and the Corps have unveiled to put bike lanes on Napoleon Avenue when they rebuild it. What that means is that neutral ground where everybody goes for the parades, they're talking about shrinking that 9 feet. Big reaction from the neighborhood. I mean,
sure.
that's, this is your area, hallowed ground in the city.
Yeah.
So,
I don't want that.
no, in the Napoleon neutral ground? I don't know. I think people are very attached to it. That's where, it's the one place where there's a big open space. Certainly
a lot of families gather there. That's
certainly
for sure.
the neighbors are very upset, and they feel like they were blindsided, and they're really talking about trying to change the city's mind.
It's so rare for a city to have a community meeting space, something like that. And we're blessed to have that.
But of course, the city is putting in bike lanes all over. It's a big push. It came out of all of the post-Katrina community planning. People really did want it and are happy to have all these new bike paths. But what a number of people brought up really from around the city is there's some scary encounters out there, and a lot of people I've had them. A lot of people have had them. We've had some very tragic accidents recently. And, this idea that maybe not everyone understands the rules of the road, and maybe the cars don't understand what the bikes are supposed to do, and the bicyclists don't understand what the cars are supposed to do. I drive down Barone every day where they took away a traffic lane, and there's a bike lane, and cars barrel down it.
That one is really controversial. That bike lane definitely is.
So I think there was this real plea for education, discussion about how we learn to live together. And the mayor said, look, they do this in New York City. We can do this. We just need to talk
figure it out.
We need to figure this out.
So these community meetings continue.
There are 2 more, District A and District E, later in the summer.
All right, thanks, Steph. All right, looking ahead, Errol.
In Metairie, the new Fresh Market specialty grocery store is scheduled to open this Wednesday. It's going to be interesting competition for Whole Foods. I mean, a lot of good shopping. And the ceremony that you have, I guess, when you open the specialty grocery store, 8 o'clock next Wednesday, they're going to have what they call the cracking of the Parmesan.
Nice.
And then with that, they'll begin. So a new store on Veteran, 755.
Sounds yummy. Okay, thanks, Errol. Jeremy.
I'm watching oil prices next week. They hit a 3-month low last week, did it again this week. They closed at like $50 on Wednesday. What's important is that the budget right now in Louisiana is based on an annual average price of $61 a barrel. If this continues for a month, that's less money for the budget. We could be looking at pre-mid-year budget cuts.
Oh, goodness. Okay, thanks. Jonathan.
Earlier I mentioned Donald Harris Jr., the son of a former New Orleans police officer. His funeral services are Saturday at this same church out east where Darrell Holloway was laid to rest.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Jonathan. Stephanie.
We have a vacancy at the federal court in New Orleans. Judge Ivan Lamel just turned 65 and took senior status, which means there's an opening. Until recently, President Obama would go to Mary Landrieu and ask for suggestions. She's no longer in the Senate. Confirmation goes through the Senate. That means it goes through David Vitter, who has a friend who would like the job, apparently. So it'll be interesting to see if we see Barack Obama and David Vitter on the same page. How would that be?
That would be interesting, as you said.
Yes.
Thank you very much, you guys, for being here and for a very interesting discussion. Thank you for joining us, and we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.